Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope that you can see and hear me all right so far. In a couple moments, we're going to kickstart this informational webinar, which is for the ECoH Request for Proposals with Templeton World Charity Foundation. The idea today is to present a bit of background on what we're hoping to achieve through this RFP, and to also walk you through some of the more sort of intricate details of the application process, including using our online platform, Flex, etc. There's going to be ample time also to answer questions at the end. So you can do that in a number of ways. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, or we'll also try to monitor everyone. And if you raise your hand, we'll try to enable that you can answer questions live too. So maybe just to begin, my name is Ellen Morgan, and I'm an external advisor with Templeton World Charity Foundation. I'm joined today by a number of colleagues who are from the foundation, including Eric Marshall, Bonnie Zal, Andrika Smith-Monroe, and also Sherelle Carroll. So there's lots of us here. And I'm going to turn it over now to Eric Marshall to kick off the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. And I offer all of you a warm welcome for joining us here this morning. So if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, I'm Eric Marshall. I am Director of Programs in Discovery Science at Templeton World Charity Foundation. And I'll give you a very short overview of our request for proposals, what we're looking for, and then Ellen and my colleagues will discuss in more detail the RFP process and the anatomy of a full proposal, and then we're hoping to leave significant time for your questions so that we can help answer them. So first of all, an introduction to those of you who may not know the foundation from which this proposal comes. We are the Templeton World Charity Foundation. We were founded in 1996 by Sir John Templeton. We have a base in Nassau in the Bahamas. And as the name implies, we really have a world focus. And this foundation supports researchers around the world to discover new knowledge, to develop new tools and launch new innovations, and for the purpose of, and launch them to make a lasting impact on human flourishing. Our strategic goal is to support the discoveries, the tools, and the innovations in the world that promote human flourishing for all, in spite of and in the face of diversity. So we go to the next slide. So that brings us to this initiative. We're really getting started with an initiative that we're calling Exploring Our Common Humanity in Diverse Contexts. And there's a real juxtaposition here between our common humanity, how we can all flourish, what are the universals, what do we all share, and then the fact that we are in diverse contexts. And really the motivation for this approach is that we recognize that the current state of science of human flourishing doesn't fully represent the breadth and diversity of human experience around the globe in different cultures. So in exploring our common humanity in diverse context, and for short, ECoH, we have three priorities. So we go back to this last slide. So the three priorities. First, we want to consolidate knowledge about the cognitive, affective, social, and spiritual human capacities that promote human flourishing. Second, we need to look at how to improve understanding and to improve understanding about what it means to flourish in diverse contexts. And finally, we want to build the capacity of researchers globally in different regions around the world to undertake interdisciplinary research on human flourishing. Many key words here: interdisciplinary, human flourishing, cognitive, affective, social, and spiritual human capacities, and diverse contexts. So those are all sort of keys to understanding what we're looking for. So we go to our next slide. I will then share that in this particular RFP, what we're hoping to do. So this is a first stage to really landscape, to map the field, because long-term, we're looking to explore the feasibility of establishing up to 3 regional collaborative research hubs that will provide opportunities to advance scientific research on interdisciplinary topics and outcomes that are central to human flourishing. So in this RFP, we're seeking to award 3 grants of up to $260,000 US to map these key areas: the research landscape, the leadership landscape, the training landscape, and the partnership landscape for the study of human flourishing in one or more of these critical regions: Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. So with that, I'll hand back to my colleague, Ellen, to explain a little bit more about what we're looking for and how you can apply.
Great. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Eric. So the first step, as always, is please make sure that you take the time to explore the ECoH webpage, which has background on the information, as well as the ECoH RFP page. And so the information is available online, and you can also download both in PDF form. There's also a really important sort of document that basically just has application guidance, so how to log into the portal, etc. So make sure that you look at all of those before starting your application. And then the next step is really to register your interest. So you'll go to the link that's provided, and you'll see a portal registration where you'll be asked for some basic information, such as your name, your organization, where you're based. And we also ask you to write a small paragraph about who you are, why you think you have the capacity to respond to this request for proposals, and making reference to any experience or any work that you might have done in the past. And the idea behind this is simply to sort of make sure that people who have the capacity and the interest are really getting access to the full proposal materials. It's a bit of a stage 1 screening process. So once you register your interest, you should receive a notification within 3 business days with information about how to access the full proposal materials, which will all be online via our Flux portal system. So after you follow the login instructions, you're going to find a screen that looks a little bit like this. And you'll be able to start your proposal by clicking essentially on this draft button, which is in the left-hand menu. And that's going to bring up essentially a page that has a series of different text boxes. Sometimes there's drop-down options to answer, etc. And that's where you're going to fill in your material. There's going to be places where you're going to be asked to upload documents or different applications. For example, the budget is an Excel document. But again, the specific instructions for what to put in each section are going to be available in that PDF guidance document. So I'm going to review just really briefly the full proposal, the key sections. So in some ways, the most important part is the project description. And this is where we are really looking for you to present your plan of activities. So tell us how you are going to sort of answer the questions that we've laid out, talk about your research methodology, sort of the timeline, etc., and how you're going to go about essentially delivering all the different outputs we've asked for. There's also a section on donor intent. And this is where we ask you to essentially to take a stab at speaking about essentially how the proposal is going to align with what we call donor intent. And so this is where you can demonstrate your familiarity with the foundation's goals and its interests, and the alignment with the priority area. We also have some resources that I'll point to towards the end that can help you shape this. Next, the budget. As I mentioned, this is an Excel budget template that has instructions embedded within it about what to put in sort of each line area. There's a couple of important limitations that I want to flag. The first is that we have a 15% total overhead, and there's also a travel budget limit of 10% for people who are not direct employees of the legal organization. So just make sure that you note those two things when you're putting together the budget. In terms of supporting documents, we will ask for 2-page CVs of the main people who are going to be involved in the project. We're also going to ask for letters of support from any partner organizations. So for example, if it's a coalition of different organizations who are going to be responding, we'll want to make sure that any organization that's not the main grant recipient has written a short letter that says that they support this work. And we actually have a template that you can use for that. Then the third type of document that's important for this proposal is any examples of past work that you've done. So for example, if you've done a scoping review, systematic reviews, if you're a consultancy and you've done something similar for other clients, it's really helpful if you can provide us with examples, either by providing hyperlinks, a reference list, or even the written examples themselves. The other key area is the outputs and outcomes section. Now, the outputs for this request for proposals are essentially predefined. So again, in that guidance document, you'll have them there. So it's really just a question of making sure that you put those into the correct section in the proposal. And similar to the outcomes, we have, a clear idea of what we want to get out of this. So it's just a question of making sure they're in the right spot in the proposal. So to go into a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, project description, past experience, the approach and methodology, and talk about why you and your team are well placed to do this work. So you could talk about your existing networks in the region. You could talk about disciplinary expertise. You could also talk about your linguistic capacities. And we'd also really appreciate sort of a brief timeline that's going to be used to complete the project. For donor intent, we have the first really resource is our website, which describes our aims and also what this ECO Priority Initiative wants to do. We also have available a number of writings from Sir John Templeton himself, and these can be downloaded by going to the website and essentially clicking over the title of the book. And these might be really helpful when you're trying to write that donor intent section. This is a brief example of the Excel budget template. This is sort of the summary page. Within the Excel list, there's a variety of different tabs that will give you explicit direction on what to put in each of these areas. But you can see to the left here that the main categories are personnel, classroom teaching, operational research, and then 2 types of travel and lodging, as well as other. And the overhead percent, which can't be more than 15, again, goes in this section that's highlighted yellow. Supporting documents, as I mentioned, anybody who's named in the budget or going to be receiving more than $5,000 as a consultant should be listed as a team member, and we would like you to include their CV. The letter of support, you can use something really simple, such as is displayed here to the right-hand side of the screen. And as I mentioned, examples of previous work. There is also going to be a section where we ask for organizational governance documents. And what we mean by this are things like, a memorandum of understanding or your charter, financial statements, etc. But there's more detail in the application process about what's necessary. So outputs, as I mentioned, we sort of have some predefined outputs, and essentially what we are looking for is a report for TWCF that's going to summarize, all the findings. We will also ask you to provide a report for external stakeholders, because it's really important to us that this research and this sort of scoping work that is done can help other people too, who are interested in doing similar work. So we'll want essentially an internal facing report and an externally facing report, along with a PowerPoint presentation that's going to summarize some of the main findings and key statistics. And then finally, towards the end of the grant, we're really interested in having you host sort of a convening to disseminate the findings with potential stakeholders. So those are the main outputs. We've also put the first bullet is where we talk about exploratory convenings. And this is just acknowledging that as you're doing this work, it's probably going to be relevant for you to host some small meetings with key stakeholders, with other researchers, and that's what that bullet point is related to. Finally, outcomes. There's two main things that we're looking from here. First, we want to essentially better understand the research capacity, needs, and opportunities on topics related to human flourishing worldwide. We also want to be better informed in order to develop effective funding mechanisms to support more research on this topic. So again, there's sort of an external facing focus and an internal facing focus for Templeton in terms of the outcomes. Just to go really briefly over the timeline, so the funding opportunity is currently open. If you're interested in sort of submitting a full proposal, I'd encourage you to complete the registration step as soon as possible so that you can have access to the full proposals. The full proposals are due on the 14th of April. We will send some of these for external peer review, and then the shortlisted applications are going to be notified on the 12th of May. Anyone who's shortlisted is going to have an opportunity to revise and respond to the external or to the reviewer's feedback. And final applications will be due at the end of May, with the likely earliest start date being September 2023. And we're really looking for a project duration of 12 to 18 months. Ideally, we'd love to have sort of the main report, for example, submitted to us at 12 months with any sort of dissemination activities taking place in the 12 to 18 months afterwards. So I'm going to end there and we can start taking some questions, but again, just some very relevant links, the ECoH homepage, the ECoH RFP page, the registration portal. And if you have any questions, please send an email to Andrika directly and we'll help to answer those. These slides and the links are going to be available after, because I know it's hard to use a hyperlink on a presentation, and we will also be sharing a copy of this presentation. Great, so I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. And maybe we can start by just seeing if there's any questions in the Q&A section. All right, I'm going to start addressing these live just one by one. So does the reference to the writings of Templeton suggest that there needs to be a religious or spiritual dimension to the proposal? So that's a good question. Yes, in the sense that what the foundation is interested in is what Sir John Templeton would refer to as spiritual capacities that enable us to flourish. But the definition of spiritual is also quite broad. So we're talking about cognitive, affective capacities, etc. So I think that, you know, it's also really important to keep in mind that 85% of the world identifies as religious in some way or spiritual. And so it's not to be neglected, but it doesn't have to be, you know, solely focused on a religious element. As you will see, if you go through our project database, we fund lots of projects on, for example, gratitude in the education sector that have a link to how we flourish, but they don't have a specific religious dimension or element. So the answer is yes, but it's a very broad interpretation of what constitutes spirituality. Sorry, let me go to the next one. Is this grant targeting systematic reviews, synthesis, or empirical studies? So we have purposely not said that this needs to be a systematic analysis. We're interested in what I would define more as a scoping or a landscaping review. And this is important because something that is systematic tends to be exhaustive. So we're not necessarily looking for you to take, every country in Africa and look at every psychological research paper that has been published and sort of try to synthesize all of that information. We are looking for people who have familiarity in a region, who are able to map using, whatever method you think is most appropriate, the key research outputs that are coming from fields like psychology, neuroscience, or philosophy. And we've listed a number of fields there, but we don't, again, necessarily mean that you need to cover every single discipline that's there. There may be some disciplines that are more relevant or more mature in certain regions than others. So we're very conscious that we're sort of making a global ask. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. And we want to give you the scope to narrow and prioritize and identify based on your knowledge as experts in a specific region or a specific field. Sorry, could you explain whether the 10% travel limitation includes convening the meetings? Yes, so the 10% travel limitation includes anything to do with travel and accommodation. But again, there's an important distinction. So if, let's say it's the University of Los Andes that's applying, anybody who's employed by the University of Los Andes would not be limited by that 10%. It would be, for example, if you're working with an external consultant or you're trying to move other people around, that's where the 10% limitation falls.
Ellen,
so, yeah, go ahead, Andrika, if you want to clarify.
No. I was just gonna, if you are satisfied with the answer, I was gonna tell you to, I'm just dismissing them as you answer. So if you go back to the top, the question that says, can the context of flourishing be more, yeah.
Sorry, so I'm skipping. Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Yes. So can the context of flourishing be super specific? So that's a great question. And I would say at the moment, we are not looking for super specific. We're okay with specific, but we're more interested in getting a sense of flourishing from an interdisciplinary perspective. So human flourishing in primary healthcare is probably not something we would want to accept a scoping review on right now, but human flourishing for a healthy society is something that would maybe be a little bit more aligned in terms of a focal area. But again, the purpose right now is not actually to try and identify work that's being done specifically on human flourishing, because it's a unique topic, the term has different definitions. We're looking to have a map of people who are doing research on topics related to flourishing. And who are the top performing researchers that are interested in potentially doing interdisciplinary work in a specific region. So I'd encourage you to keep the topic broad and to focus more on narrowing either the country context that you focus on or the disciplinary contexts. Great.
The next
question. So the next question, which is about sort of a lot of the call seems to focus on particular fields like anthropology, psychology, whereas biodiversity and nature experiences are critical to human flourishing. Definitely. And I would say that these ideas do have traction. We've sort of, again, because we're approaching this from a bit of a global sphere, we've put examples of the types of disciplines that we're interested in, but these are not exhaustive. So for example, in certain regions, where there's an extreme threat from climate change, where biodiversity is really under attack, that field might be the most relevant for human flourishing. So please, we'd encourage you to put forward a proposal that includes that field. But again, we will want to see more than a single discipline covered. So it might be sort of biodiversity, along with economics, along with anthropology, because they're all very much linked, for example. So why is education a field that's not listed? So one of the reasons that we haven't listed what I would call the more applied fields or sectors, such as education and health, is because that the types of research that we aim to fund sort of through these centers is very much more focused on what you'd call sort of formative or basic research. So we're more interested in sort of the fundamental concepts of what does it mean to flourish in different contexts? How do different people experience flourishing in similar or different ways? So with this initiative, we are not going to be funding the development of, let's say, a curriculum to promote flourishing in schools. We're going to be funding sort of the background research that would go into the development by clarifying the concepts, by creating measurement tools, for example. So that's a really important question. And just for some reference, the way Templeton in general divides our funding, we have three areas. We have discovery, we have development, and we have launch. And this discovery area, which is where this call fits, is all about answering fundamental questions about what it means to be human. Our development area, where we have a number of programs, including most of the projects that I support, are about developing curricula, developing tools, developing practical things that can be implemented through health and education and community sectors. But that's not the focus of this request for proposals. Although we do understand that the discoveries that are made with this research should have an applied potential. We're just not going to be funding the curriculum with this pot of money, for example.
Yeah, and if I could add,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other point to that, which is, well, first of all, to emphasize that this is really about looking for the capacities and the knowledge in the regions, as well as what are the core research questions. And there's I think an important acknowledgement that many of the most important research questions are driven through through practices like education, healthcare. But so there can be a focus on how the research and the research questions are driven by practice, and also how they inform practice. There's a real interest in seeing that. But again, emphasizing Ellen's point, the focus is on looking at the disciplines they're really doing the research to understand the mechanisms at play and to make measurements so that we really understand what's going on. Because so much of the research and the measurements in the past have been focused not on people in these regions.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I'm going to answer this question about essentially when you're putting together a proposal, you know that you might hire a postdoc, but you don't necessarily know who this person is. That's okay. You can just list sort of a postdoc and the amount of budget that would be dedicated to them. And in some cases, we might, once you've hired this person, once the project begins, we might ask for further information about them, but you can just list sort of placeholders and note that these people will be hired. Can 2 or 3 universities apply together? Yes, please, that would be great. I mean, we really think that this is an endeavor that's more suited to collaboration because it requires a large range of experts, essentially. The one thing to note, though, is that the grant, if it comes to being awarded, would be made with a single university, and the other universities would be listed as essentially additional organizations. And so we would ask that you provide a letter of support from each of the other 2 universities to show that they're in this with you. Regarding the potential regions, do you prefer one region or multiple? So this sort of really depends on a number of things. One is the extent of your sort of network and expertise, but also the size of the region. So for example, it may make sense to do Latin America and the Caribbean if you have that network. But if you don't, it's okay. We'll definitely accept single region coverage. We don't have an expectation for you to do more than one, but we appreciate some people might have expertise in multiple regions. Can I give specific fields of study? So we've provided some example areas that we feel are of interest. So neuroscience, psychology, economics, anthropology, philosophy, religious studies, but this is not exhaustive and it's not exclusive. So again, as experts, we're looking for you to define what you think are the most relevant fields for the study of human flourishing in your region, and to select a few of those and to propose something. So looking at this next one, the call is to map the field in one of the defined regions, as it is not to propose an original or creative perspective on human flourishing. Yes, exactly. At this point, we're looking for a mapping exercise. In future, we hope to have opportunities to fund sort of specific research programs, but human flourishing is a huge field, and we want to be able to define and narrow our focus, our research funds in future. And so this exercise is meant to help us to do that. Are we interested to map researchers, or do you also want to map NGOs, agencies, business, religious organizations, semi-governmental organizations, for instance? Yeah, that's a great question. So because at the moment we're interested in funding essentially studies looking at fundamental questions related to flourishing, we definitely feel that it's important to map academic researchers. But we do appreciate that there are other actors who would contribute to this. So we're happy for this to be included, but for example, NGOs, consultancies, religious organizations could be an important part of that, but we definitely need the focus for this stage to be on the academic and the research network, because that's what we're going to be funding. And so I would just keep in mind, I feel like we're asking a lot in terms of the scope. So just make sure that the academic research is the priority and to include the other ones as you can.
Yeah, just to briefly add on that, one of the areas that we've detailed as for the mapping are what we call partners. And so with the focus on the academic institutions, what's their ecosystem? What are their networks? Which funding resources do they already have access to and are in the area that might be interested in contributing to the sustainability of these sorts of efforts, as well as who are the NGOs and also policymakers who are connected, who are helping to drive the research questions and can benefit from the work of these centers. So again, focus on the academics, but the ecosystem they're in and their node, their strength as a node in a network is really of interest to us. What are the existing networks that develop that these academic institutions and individuals have connection to? That's of great interest.
Yeah. So this next question I'll read out in full because it's a bit complex. So it's asking to differentiate between sort of two questions. So is Templeton interested in having applicants hone in on the areas of human flourishing that the applicant knows to be relevant to their region, and then explore and landscape these issues from an array of disciplinary perspectives? Or is the aim for applicants to explore as many issues as possible relevant to their region regarding human flourishing, and then broadly landscape these? So my perspective is that the first question is more relevant for us. And this is because our long-term aim is to establish research centers on human flourishing in the region. And we are not going to be establishing these from scratch. So for example, we're not going to establish a research center on an area where there's no current existing research or capacity. We want to essentially identify where there's really promising research happening that we can essentially catalyze and help to make more relevant by bringing together interdisciplinary perspectives and injecting some funding into that area. And sorry, the next one, are there limits on the amount of funding one organization can be supported by? So no, in this context, if you already have an award with TWCF, you're still eligible to apply for this, no problem. The precise, so I'm not sure if I understand this question in terms of what is the precise job description for each grantee. So maybe if I can ask whoever wrote it to elaborate, I'll be sure to come back. Next question, does Templeton prefer that applicants themselves be academic institutions, or can they be organizations with partners with academic institutions? Yeah, that's fine. So we are across the board, we fund academic institutions, we fund NGOs, and we fund private companies. And the lead applicant can be any one of those. What we will look to see is if you have the requisite partnerships and capacities to do this work. So for example, this type of work could be very well suited to a consultancy firm or a think tank, for example, not necessarily a university, and that's fine. So is there a space in the budget where we can list our contribution in kind? Yes, there is actually. So there's going to be a column just before the end where it talks about additional funding. So you can list that there and also sort of expand upon it in the narrative section. Sorry, I missed this as a note, contrary to use university. Oh, sorry, I missed the second part. Apologies if you want to rewrite it. No, that's okay.
I think I can bring it back. Hold on.
Okay, so the final question is, if our long-term view is to fund regional research hubs, do we anticipate the hubs will develop out of the landscaping teams? Not necessarily, no, but potential, if you want to be a potential sort of research hub, you're completely welcome to apply to this. We're not going to sort of discriminate. We'll just ask that you also do, you know, an assessment of other entities in the region, because we do anticipate that when we fund the hubs, although it might be focused on a single institution, they will likely be networked in an important way.
So the end of that question says, as a note, contrary to US universities, it is quite uncommon for faculty to be paid by grants. On the contrary, our time is considered as contribution in kind.
Yeah, that's understandable, and it makes perfect sense to list in the additional funding area.
We did have a hand raised by
Oh, did we?
Yeah, just one. I don't know if she's
Okay.
still on the call, if you still want to. Oh, I think she dropped off.
I can't see it, so
Yeah, I think she might have dropped off. Oh, no,
okay.
she's here. Amy, if you want to come off of mute and ask your question, that's perfectly fine.
All right, it doesn't sound like I can hear them. So maybe I'll just pause there and see if anybody else has any sort of pressing questions or comments. As I mentioned at the end, you're welcome to send an email to Andrika if anything comes up as you're putting together these proposals.
There is one more question by Beth in the Q&A, Ellen.
Oh, great. Let me open it up here. The collaborative research hub's phrasing sounds large scale in vision. Might you be able to define the scale that TWCF considers a hub? Yeah, that's a good question. It is large scale, but we're not hoping to do it all by ourselves. One of the things that we are really looking for is to be able to bring in and crowd in other funders who will do this. So I can't put a dollar amount on what the hubs will be at the moment. We may choose to not do 3, we might do 2, but we definitely anticipate these to be sort of multi-institution efforts and to have other funders involved. And how will you do this? Navigate teams highlighting their own work to have an inside track on hub funding. Yeah, this is, this is something that we're going to have to deal with. I think at this point, this is essentially a scoping or a landscaping review. So we would anticipate that you use the same methodology to evaluate the work of your own institution as you would for any other institution in the region. So, just apply your methods, either the number of interviews you do, the number of focus groups, the surveys that you have people answer in the same way, sort of to your own work and your own area. And that's the best way to manage it. Let me see another one. So is it possible to focus further on a specific region, for example, Southern or Western or Eastern Africa? Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I think we would be open to that, provided the justification is strong. So again, it all comes back to, we're looking for sort of the strongest and most exciting research related to human flourishing. And if you can make a good case for, that's mostly coming out of East Africa in these disciplinary areas, then that's fine. You can focus on one. Another perspective could be, you might decide to take large countries or places that have, well-established universities within Africa. It might not be focused on a specific geography, but you could decide to take, I don't know, five countries in Africa and do a much more focused analysis, and that's okay. Again, we're sort of defaulting to your expertise and guidance here. I might have missed it due to network issues. What are the reporting timelines? Yeah, so we do outline those a little bit more on the website, where we talk about sort of when we're expecting the different outputs to come. But we will have a large reporting period, essentially 12 months after the start date, where we're going to expect things like the reports, especially the internal facing report to TWCF. And then, by the 18 months is when we'll probably hope that you will have had the dissemination meetings where you're going to disseminate the outputs. And in terms of budgetary financial reporting, again, it's on a yearly basis and also at the end of the grant. Because of the nature of this work, we are going to have some expectation that you keep in touch with us, for example, via a phone call on a quarterly basis, especially as the work evolves. Sorry, the last one. Do you allow for qualitative forms of measurement as part of scoping mechanisms, i.e. description of in-depth work with communities? Yes, I think qualitative approaches would definitely fit. Is there any benefit of the prime applicant being US based as opposed to the prime located in the region we are focusing on? No, the exact sort of location, with a few exceptions, sorry, which include countries that are on essentially a list of places we can't fund, which include places like Syria. There's maybe about 5 of those. The applicants can be from any geographic region. What we will look for when we look for sort of a team capacity and expertise is, do you have the knowledge and the networks in the region that you're studying, regardless of where sort of you yourself are based as the applicant institution? Is it possible to apply with a proposal focus on measuring the effects of a program implemented in different countries? So for this call for proposals, we're not focused on sort of the evaluation of a single project or program. We're looking for a landscape review of different individuals, different researchers who are interested and working on topics related to flourishing.
We have a, sorry, go on.
Yeah, go ahead, Joyce. I was going to say, I saw the hand.
I posted the question in the chat, but my understanding, I'm just checking my understanding, is that we will only be able to access the full proposal once we do the first step, which is the expression of interest. Is my understanding correct? Or can we
That's correct.
do both at the same? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but we should be able to turn over the sort of expressions of interest pretty fast. We just want to make sure that we filter out people who haven't necessarily read it in detail and think that we're funding, you know, specific projects in flourishing, for example. Great. All right, well, it looks like those are the only questions for today. So if there aren't any more, we will say thank you so much for joining and listening. We hope that, oh, wait, one came up. Oh, thank you. Okay, no problem. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful. Again, please reach out to us if you have any questions or want to discuss further. You know, there's a number of us on this call, and we'd be happy to be available to talk through anything with you.
We very much appreciate your interest and look forward to hearing your thoughts and your questions.
All right, bye everyone.